Hello everyone, in this video we will learn how to make a complete 3D survival game. It requires a series and it is part 1. In this part we will learn about the movement of a player, that how we control the player with the help of mouse and buttons. So let's get started today's video. Please follow me. First open Unity. Select 3D and rename. Create a project. Now first right click in the hierarchy tab, select 3D and add terrain. Then simply create empty and rename player, then reset it like this. Now inside player add cylinder. Now we are going to make it a bit wider, taller. Make sure it's really in the middle of the player parent like this. Now we are going to remove this capsule collider, because on our player object we are going to add character controller. Character controller also works as a collider, so we don't need capsule collider. Another thing, I want to change the radius little bit. You can see this green line. Now it's time to add main camera to the player like this. Make parent and child and reset. Now select camera and set on the top of the cylinder like this, because usually the head of the person is up here. Now it's time to add scripts. Create folder, rename scripts, double click on it. Then again right click, create C# and rename mouse movement. Then another create script and rename player movement. Then open mouse movement script. Write as it is in the top using system.collection, using system.collection.generic. These are using directives that include the necessary namespaces for working with collections and generic. And using Unity engine, this using directive includes the unity.engine namespace, which provides access to Unity's scripting API. Then public class mouse movement colon mono behavior. This line defines a C# class called mouse movement that inherits from the mono behavior class. Then write public float mouse sensitivity is equal to 100F. Add comment for better understand. This line declares the public float variable named mouse sensitivity with a default value of 100. This variable controls the sensitivity of mouse movement. Then float x rotation and y rotation. These lines declare two float variables, x rotation and y rotation, which will be used to store the current rotation angles around the x-axis and y-axis respectively. Void start function. Basically, start is called before the first frame update. Inside the start method, this line sets the cursor lock state to locked, which hides the cursor and locks it to the center of the screen. Then line number 27. This line calculates the horizontal mouse movement by multiplying the input from the mouse x-axis, which moves left and right movement, with the mouse sensitivity and the time elapsed since the last frame. Time dot delta time. Basically, time is pre-made class in the Unity, and this value represents the change in rotation around the x-axis. And line number 28. Similarly, This line calculates the vertical mouse movement up and down and scales it by the sensitivity at time. This value represents the change in rotation around the x-axis. Now x rotation minus is equal to mouse y. Here the vertical mouse input negative mouse y is subtracted from the current x rotation. This controls the up and down rotation looking up and down. Now line number 34. This line clamps the x rotation angle between minus 90 degrees to 90 degrees to prevent over rotation, simulating a realistic vertical viewing angle limit like in real life. Then line number 38. The horizontal mouse input mouse X is added to the Y rotation, controlling the left and right rotation looking left and right. Now this line updates the object's local rotation using a quaternion dot Euler representation with the calculated x rotation and y rotation angles. This effectively rotates the object in response to mouse movement. Now our mouse movement script is completed. Write as it is and then press Ctrl S to save and hit back to the Unity. And this minus 90 degree to 90 degree basically movement of player like this, 90 degree and minus 90 degree, and mouse X and mouse Y basically when we go to the edit mode, project settings, internal manager, is mouse X and mouse Y. Now it's time to write the script in the player movement. Public character controller with C small letter. This variable allows you to reference the character controller component attached to the player character in the Unity inspector. Then public float speed, public float gravity, public float jump height. First, public float speed. This variable sets the player's movement speed. You can adjust it to control how fast the player character moves. Then public float gravity. This variable sets the gravity applied to the player. It's multiplied by 2 to make gravity stronger. You can adjust the value to control the strength of gravity. Then public float jump height is equal to 3. This variable determines how high the player can jump. You can change the value to adjust the jump height. And F is basically float. Then public transform ground check. There is a reference to a game object's transform, usually an empty game object that is used to check if the player is grounded. It should be positioned just below the player's feet. Public float ground distance is equal to 0.4. This variable sets the radius of a sphere used to check it if the player is grounded. It should be adjusted based on your player's size. Public layer mask ground mask. This variable specifies which layers are considered as ground. For the ground check, you can assign specific layers in the Unity inspector. Vector 3 velocity. This is a vector 3 variable used to track the player's velocity, particularly in the vertical y direction. Then bool is grounded. This boolean variable keeps track of whether the player is currently grounded. Now go to the update function. This line uses a sphere cast to check if the player is grounded. It casts a sphere from the ground check position with a radius of ground distance and checks if it collides with any object on the specified ground mask layers. If the sphere intersects with the ground, is grounded is set to true. Because is grounded is boolean type data type, means true or false. Then we write a condition if is grounded and velocity.y is less than 0. If the sphere is grounded and their vertical velocity is less than 0, falling, this code sets the vertical velocity to a small negative value minus 2f. This prevents the player from continuously accelerating downward when standing on the ground. These lines capture the player's input for horizontal left, right, and vertical forward background movement using the input axis, horizontal and vertical. Basically, these horizontal and vertical, when again go to the project setting input manager, horizontal and vertical. This line combines the horizontal and vertical input to create a movement vector move. It takes into account the player orientation, rotation, and combines the right X and forward Z directions. In line number 42, this line moves the player using the character controller component. It multiplies the movement vector by the speed and time dot delta time to ensure smooth movement regardless of frame rate. Right and left is the red axis and forward backward is the blue axis. And again right if condition. Line number 45. This line applies the gravity to the player's vertical velocity over time. It simulates the effect of gravity pulling the player downward. Then inside right, line moves the player vertically using the updated velocity, which accounts for both jumping and gravity. Again, time dot delta time ensures smooth movement. Now it's time to debug a mouse movement script is ready. Press Ctrl S to save and hit back to the Unity. Then select player and drag and drop both mouse movement and player movement script to the player. Now look, speed, gravity, jump height in the player movement script. Look in the inspector tab. Now create object, rename ground check and simply drag and drop in this location and set at the bottom of the cylinder. And simply drag and drop character controller in the controller. Now it's time to add ground mask. First, select layer, ground, go to the terrain and select ground. Simply select ground. By default, jump is space button. Now A, S, W and D were keys for movement and our mouse is not working. Mouse Y and mouse X. Simply space in the mouse X and mouse Y, then our mouse work. Now our mouse also working with the left, right, top, bottom arrows like this. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed the video, connect with LinkedIn page Vector Labz FZE LLC. See you in the next part. Thank you.